journey that put me on the path to be the CEO of this company and to try to be the steward of such an incredible mission as we have. In times in life, right? And you know, back then, did I see some grand purpose and all those things that I was going through when I was heaving over the bucket just, you know, day after day when I was in the hospital? No, I didn't. Wow, sorry about that. A little awkward. I'll just try not to make that sound again, whatever it was. I think it was a half laugh of sorts, so I'll just save that for the end there. No, you know, and I think we often all can see that, you know, there's, of course, the phrase that, you know, hindsight is 20/20, but when we spend too much time asking why me when we're going through our challenges, sometimes we can miss the whole point. And that's certainly what I learned. Well, that's just one of the things that I learned. But let's just kind of get at it. This story really for me starts when I was in Brazil. I served a mission for my church. I was one of those in the white shirt and tie walking around somehow in 120-degree weather right on the equator. And with 3 weeks left in my mission, I got like deathly sick. We found the source of it. There was a dead bird up in our water supply. And I was just violently ill. I lost a lot of weight. And so I went home kind of already a little compromised, but I think I got better. And it was a year and a half later that I met Shalane. And this is kind of a funny part of the story, since there's so many of you who have not heard this. It's just, I was going to college at the time, and I met her at church. So there are blessings when you go to church, gentlemen. Yes. She called me, and the whole call was kind of weird for me because I'm like, wait a second, she's hot, she's attractive. And I was a little socially challenged at that time in my life. And she asked me out. It was the first time that had ever happened to me. And for a Friday night, for a party, which first of all set me on high alert. I was like, party? Sure, there's dancing involved. And I said, oh, I already canceled my plans because I have to babysit my niece. To which she promptly said, oh, I love babysitting. And like the socially challenged computer science major that I was, I responded, oh, really? Because I really did want to go out with these friends. And so, like, I thought she was offering to babysit for me. And there was a long pause on the other end. About 6 seconds into the pause, I figured it out, you know, just a little light bulb. Oh, did you mean with me or for me? Well, I was kind of thinking with you. And I said, oh, yes, of course, yeah. But anyway, we wound up going out on Saturday morning with my niece to Denny's. That was our first date. And it all worked out well. 6 months later, we were married. Yeah. And I had to hurry because there was a storm coming in my life that I needed her for. And so it was only 5 months after that I was diagnosed. And how that transpired is a story by itself. This was the days before cell phones. And I had left school to go stay with my parents just for a few months. And so at this time I was in Boise. So I still had a tropical, like, I guess it wasn't a disease, it was a parasite, and things that I still had in me from my mission to Brazil. And so I drove to Utah with my mother to get this 3-day treatment. 3 days. And I showed up and they explained the treatment that I was going to get, and they had me in a shared room with a curtain, and then a nurse came and got me, and she said, I'm going to take you to your new room. Brought me up to the 5th floor, and I walked into the hematology oncology division, which at that time I had no idea what that meant. that was probably well that I didn't know that. And corner room, suite, big suite with a private bathroom and all this. And I said, wow, thanks for the upgrade. And she said, oh yeah, people with your type of leukemia always get their own rooms. And I said, excuse me? She said, oh yeah, you have acute myeloma? Oh yeah, that's the bad kind. And I said, no, I'm the parasite guy. And she said, oh no, it says here that you have this, and she confirmed my full name and my date of birth, and so then I was starting to get really concerned. Show me those charts. And she said, oh yeah, and then I saw her face. She said, oh, you just got here today, huh? And she was seeing dates of when things had been put onto my charts, and she said, yeah, you just have a seat and I'll be right back. So I sit down, kind of thinking, no, certainly know if I had leukemia. Well, in comes a train of doctors, and they confirmed that I did have leukemia, and they wanted to start chemotherapy the following day. So to say that was a shock was, of course, true, and that started a journey in my life. I have some pictures here. That was my attempt to smile, by the way. Yeah, there we go. And this story has a hero, and of course that would be Shalane. She was holding down a job back in Boise, which was another miracle by itself. We got health insurance 3 days before the day that I went into the hospital. And the bills for my little stint in the hospital were about $700,000. So that would not have been a good start to our marriage, to say the least. But, so I started chemotherapy, and it was a high-dose type of chemotherapy that they would give it to me over 6 days, and then wait for all hell to break loose, which is what would happen. They were, of course, always concerned about my white blood count, because that's the type of cancer that I had. And they wanted that count to basically get to 0, because they had to kill all of them. And so in that state of having no white blood cells, you can't fight off any infection. And so I would have basically everything, and they would be giving me all kinds of antibiotics, and I'd be sick. I made a decision during that time period that I could sit and wallow, or I could get up and try to do something. And it was in the process of doing that I made some very close friends, 3 especially, and they all did not make it. But one that stands out, his name was Greg Johnston. Oh yeah, that's me again. This is Greg Johnston. But that's not Greg Johnston. The 24-year-old that I met was 6'4", 240 pounds, a cowboy from Vernal, Utah. And on his first day, I found out that he had the exact same kind of leukemia that I had, but his had gone way past what I had, and he was in what the doctors call a blast crisis, that he had way more cancer cells than he had just of his normal cells. And he was going to get the port put in that I had. So I came in there to just say hi, and I showed him my port, and he said, Derek, I don't have time for this. I just like to get drunk and fight. And they usually happen in that order. And I said, well, Greg, you won't be doing much of either here, let me tell you. And from that day on, he and I spent a lot of time together. And we would watch football. This was football season. And our nurses would, of course, track all of our calories. And we would eat about 500 calories a day, except on Monday night. Oh yeah, there's the port that I was showing him mine. We consumed Taco Bell and chips and salsa, like 3,000 calories, and it made our nurses so happy. There was something about watching football and just being in his room that I could eat again. And we would share our thoughts about our treatments. And for me, it was always rough because his were going so much worse than mine. And again, this is him after treatments, and for him, they just started to go downhill really quickly. He couldn't even get the chemotherapy without having all kinds of violent reactions. And he had a brain aneurysm, he had a stroke, he was having all kinds of problems, and he would go down to the ICU. And one day that I'll never forget, they brought a patient into his room, and I went in and I chatted with this person who happened to be named Greg also for a good 30 minutes. And I left, and a nurse, Audrey, said, "Boy, Derek, he doesn't look very good, does he?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And then I figured out she was talking about Greg. And he was so different physically that I hadn't even recognized him. And I went in and I was like, "Greg, what? Why did you let me have this whole conversation?" And he said, "I thought your treatments were causing some kind of..." So he reintroduced himself, and that was funny. Yeah, that was funny. Let me make sure I don't miss any details that I wanted to share today. All right. And it was during these times of talking that he would share with me some of his life's regrets. And at the top of the list was his daughter. He had a daughter that had to be adopted out, and he had caused an accident with his girlfriend at the time, and just on a night that he was driving home drunk. And he felt of course he felt bad about the fact that he had caused the accident, but what he felt the worst about was that she was going to grow up thinking that her parents didn't want her. And he would start to say things like, "Derek, you're going to live, and I'm not going to live, and you're going to find her." And, I didn't like that. That would cause some of, I guess, survivor's remorse or, guilt. And there would be times when I would desperately wish I could give just some of my good fortune to him so that we could kind of balance it out. But it didn't work out like that, of course. And I went home 4 months and 1 day after I checked in. And I say this sometimes because to me it was one of the lessons that I've learned, and I try to remember it now that my life is on such a different level, obviously, and I have so many blessings. But I feel like we can only experience joy to the extent that we've felt pain and sorrow. And our highs are only as high, as our lows have been. And I think that's a true principle. And so, because coming home and walking to the mailbox and spending time with Shalane and having a hamburger were like exhilarating type of experiences for me. And I was home for exactly a month, and I went back to the hospital. What picture's next here? Oh, can't show you that yet. I went back to the hospital for my first checkup. And I walked into the hospital, and I broke out in this hive from head to toe. Not a waxing hive, this was a real hive, let me tell you. And my doctor came in and I said, "Dr. Glenn, look at me." And she knew just immediately. She said, "I think there's nothing wrong with you, Derek. I think your body just doesn't want to be here again." And she was right about that. She was right about that. And so there's so much anxiety, and I feel for anyone who finds out that they have cancer, but my heart hurts extra when I hear about someone who has had to relapse. Because that person found hope and then they had it taken away. That didn't happen to me, fortunately. I have 6 siblings, and you think one of them would have given me a bone marrow donor. They all had a donor for each other, but nobody matched me. And so that would have been my plan B, would be to have to do a bone marrow transplant. And I didn't have to do that, fortunately. But I got through that checkup, and I went to find Greg, and he was back in the ICU, and he was probably 90 pounds. His cheeks were completely sunken in, and his parents were there, so I knew that it was a time when the doctors didn't think that he would make it. And I got down next to his bed, I grabbed his hand, and I said, "Greg, can you please come back up to the floor one more time?" And he squeezed surprisingly hard. And he said, "Derek, it's all right. It's all right." But he said, "But you still haven't promised me that you will do something great with your life." He said, "You have to live for us both." And to really understand how I felt, you need to understand sort of my mindset at that time. I would say that I had a healthy self-esteem. It's not that I didn't feel good about myself, but I was defined by my weaknesses. And one of my main was that I was a stutterer, just like my dad. I tried to avoid any type of speaking situation, and certainly any type of spotlight, which is why I had my career path chosen very carefully. I was going to be a software developer. It was just me and the headphones and code. And that was what I was going to do with my life. And so when he would ask me to do something great, I would think, well, there's only so much I can do here, Greg, and I knew that it was a serious situation, and I didn't want to make a promise. But he had asked me that many times before. And on this day, I did promise, and I told him I would find his daughter. And I promised that I would try to do something great, and I would try. And that was the last time that I saw Greg. And that promise, of course, stayed with me, but I didn't know what to do about it. And started my life, became a programmer. We had a daughter, and I thought life was great. And I know that God has a way of helping me kind of get a nudge in the right direction at times when I need it. And that certainly happened at this time of my life. This was a few years after, how long after, Shalane? I guess it would have been like 2002-ish, so about 3 years later. And I worked for a software company in Salt Lake City. I'm proud to say I got the job not because of my actual programming skills, but in part because I could play basketball. They had a basketball team, and the head of this department was a really good athlete, and he needed some help. Somehow, among computer nerds, he wasn't finding a lot of athletes, Imagine that. and so I got the job, and we had practice every day. We would go play for 2 hours. And it was during one of these days when I had a little accident. He got me up in the air, and he went around me, and my head landed right on the top of his head. And it was just one of those where it just kind of stings for a second, and I kind of walked it off, and I checked on him, and he turned, and his eyes just got huge, and he kind of motioned to the guys beside me, and they grabbed my arms, and they lowered me to the ground. And I was like, what the heck is going on here? And they said, don't move, you broke your eye socket. And I said, broke my eye socket? And I got him off me, and I went and I felt my face. And you know that feeling when you take a step and it's not there or something? That happened to me, feeling my face. I had to do it 3 times because I went to feel my face, and every time it went clear back here. And it felt soft. And I said, what happened? And they said, we told you, you broke your eye socket. Don't move, we called an ambulance. And I got up, and I pushed them all off me, and I got up, and I said, don't call an ambulance, because I was thinking about how much that costs. And I said, Dennis, you could drive me to the hospital. And Dennis, he goes, yeah. And I wasn't even out the door yet, and the other 8 were like, well, I guess it's game on? And so they were playing still. And Dennis walked way behind me. So I walked past all the women on the cardio machines, and I knew I was hideous because their expressions were just one of horror, And I finally got out to his car, and I pulled down the mirror, and I saw myself. And I had broken the sinus cavity and, of course, these bones right around the eye, which are the orbital bones. They had shattered. So it looked like my eye had fallen down, and this was just sunken in because it's hollow right here behind that. And I said, Dennis, hurry, it hurts now. And he goes, I told you, I wish you would have just taken the ambulance. And then it did start to hurt, every bump driving, and he was totally, he didn't want anything to do with this. And he got me up to the University of Utah Hospital, same place where I had all my treatments. And just like a man, he dropped me off at the curb, and he did get out of his seat, and he stayed on his side of the car. So you good then? And I walked into the ER by myself, and there was one guy in there with his arm in a sling, and one lady at the counter. And I walked by the guy with his arm in a sling, and he definitely was concerned for me. And she didn't look up at the counter, and she said, please sign in, put your name here, and then she goes, oh. And she patted her chest, and she goes, oh, heavens, oh. Just a second. And she ran in the back, and I could hear her talking to the ER doctor. Doctor, there's a man out here. He looks like he got hit in the face with a hammer. And he said, well, he came in by just so you get him checked in. And he peeked around the corner, and I saw his eyes flinch for just a second. So she did the whole, got the blood pressure, asked me for my insurance and everything, and it was starting to swell, by this time. And they got me back, and they were starting to give me lots of attention. And then 2 skiing accidents, trauma 1, people that were dying came in. So they had hooked me up to some morphine, but I sat there for a good 4 hours waiting. I kept pushing the nurse light, and she was like, Mr. Maxfield, we know that you are hurting. These people are dying. And the last time I said, well, how do you know I'm not dying? Because I was thinking, no, serious, by myself. I didn't know if they had called Shalane. I didn't know what was going on. And I would lean up and see myself in this mirror, and it was just starting to become this big, gooish mess. And I was like, well, I'm probably bleeding all over inside my head. And so finally they came in, and they gave me a scan, and brought me back to the room, and the doctor came in, and this is exactly what he said. He said, well, you broke your face. He said, fortunately, it's strictly cosmetic. And we have one of the world's best right here that can fix your face. But there's way too much swelling now. I talked to the doctor, and you need to come back on Wednesday. So this is Friday. I went home, showed Shalane my shiner, that we had always joked that I wanted to have a black eye, and she would always say, you're never gonna get in a fight. So and I came and I showed her this beautiful purple and yellowish just face that I had. And I went to church, and I went to work on Monday and Tuesday just so my boss could send me home, because he was the other side of the head. And I walked in on Wednesday. We were just a 1-car family, so walked in there by myself, and they said, well, this is a student hospital, so we were wondering, in the event that we have to open you up, if a student could help with the incision. And I said, well, yeah, because I had so much respect for these students that give their life to the medical field and work for 3 days straight at the hospital. But I said, but what do you mean by open me up? And he said, oh, well, your damage appears to be very extensive. So we're going to try to go in with some scopes, but if not, then we have to cut you from ear to ear and peel your face off. And I was very interested now in this procedure. I'll spare you some of the details, but he said it's just like a fish. We just get it like a fillet knife. Peel my face off. So that's what they did. The surgery took 5.5 hours because they ran out of titanium screws during the surgery. Because I had to have a lot, I guess. And it's all in there still. It's all in here. I have a dent right here that I got after the surgery. The doctor wants you all to know that. Because Dr. Orlandi, I went back 3 days after because I had bumped heads with my daughter on the ground and created a little fracture in his work, and he said, "I have to open you up again." And I said, "No thanks. No thanks." So this was not his work, this was me, this little dent here. But the climax, I guess the life-changing moment for me of this whole experience, and it sounds dramatic, but there are moments in our lives that can be a pivotal, changing moment if we let it, and if we can listen. And that's what happened to me on this day. Of course, I told you I was back in the same hospital, but the cancer ward, these 12 rooms that were just reserved for us that were getting the high-dose chemotherapy, was the certain wing on the 5th floor. And never in my whole time that I stayed there as a patient had I seen them put a post-op patient into one of those rooms. Mm-hmm. But on that day, after my surgery, they put me into room 522, which was Greg's room. And I'm coming out of my surgery, and I'm coming out of the anesthesia, and before I can open my eyes, I know exactly where I am. I don't know if it was the smells first or the sound, but I knew exactly where I was. But I was very confused as to why I was back there. And for just a few seconds, I thought maybe I was still there, but then I remembered that I had a daughter, and that I didn't have a daughter when I was there the first time. And then it all started to come back to me, and I remembered why I was there. And then that was the moment that changed my life, that I feel like it was God speaking to my heart. And it was, "Derek, exactly. You're right back here. And you're using the same excuses. You're using your speech. You're using all kinds of things that you perceive as a weakness to hold you back." And I thought about Greg, of course. I was in his room, and I felt ashamed. I did. I felt ashamed. Because I knew that I didn't really have any intentions of trying to fulfill that promise to the highest extent that I could. And so that day did change my life. I kept my same job, but I woke up every day at 4:45 for a year and a half. And I wrote in a journal, and I started working on a different piece of software. And that became the company that I started, NetSteps. Started that in 2004. And that business had a great ending financially for my family, and that was in 2010. And I wanted that to be my great thing, that I had done. But I knew that it wasn't. I knew in my heart. And it would have been around April of 2011 that I was driving home, and I was talking to Shalane on a car speaker. And we were talking about someone who had been sexually abused as a child, and the amount of guilt and shame and all that she carried in her life for what had happened to her. And I said to Shalane, I said, "That's not fair. That's not fair that she carries all of that because of what someone else did." And I said, somebody should do something about that. And I could, just this feeling in the car, it was like I was back in the hospital on that day. Same feeling of like, exactly, Derek, somebody should do something about that. And I made a connection instantly. I had had a software business that we made software for the direct selling industry. That was the software business that I had sold. And for the last few years of that business, I couldn't figure out why somebody didn't do a virtual party platform, right? There were so many home party companies, and I had pitched that actually to my clients. And in that moment, all of a sudden, I just connected it. And I was like, we can start a company to fund a foundation to help people like that. And as you can see, that's what we did. Yes, thank you. Now, did I ever think it would go this well? No. And so when I say the things like I'm thankful for what you did, I'm thankful for how many of you got behind the mission, and I am a little bit ashamed also to say that the day that I announced our intentions for the foundation, August 2014 in Dallas, for some reason I had been holding back and I'd been thinking that I didn't know how that would be received. And so to have so many people that are supporters. Have you seen the hashtags now that are Me Too, or sorry, what is it? The foundation didn't start that hashtag, but it's being co-hashtagged, I guess, with the 1 and 4 all the time now. And in a very short period of time, we are making a difference. And so 20 years from now, I can't wait to see what will happen. I told this story at the Unified number 23. Drove home that night with Shalane, and she said, why don't we find his daughter? I think she would be 18 by now, because I had tried. I had sent a letter through the judge, I had sent a copy of my book that I wrote, and we hadn't heard anything. But we started to piece the dates together, and we thought, she might be 18 now. And so she went home, and as you all know, she's very good on Facebook, and she posts all kinds of things that are like very uplifting. And that night, she found her. She found Morgan Johnston. That's her right there. And it was awesome. She came to the last Unified that was ever held at the cabin. And so for me, I thought it was the last time that I would tell that story too. And she was there, and she got to hear it. And she knows how her dad felt about her. And I can only imagine that that's been a good thing for her life too. But the thing, of course, that I'm most proud of is I can feel like I kept my promise to my friend, and I kept my promise to my God. Thank you all for being here. Thank you very much.